But what we do know as far as what Erickson is proposing is that around this time, the challenge and the crisis that the child is dealing with is autonomy, so doing something on their own, independent from somebody, versus shame and doubt. Okay? And this does seem to tie in rather nicely with what is happening with the child, because now they're walking a great deal, so they're moving away from the parent. Okay? They're exploring on their own. Okay? No, you might hear no a lot more. Okay, so they really are trying to establish some autonomy, separation, from the parent. And largely we see that when it comes to toilet training, right? Where there's a great deal of control around that. And so what Erickson proposed is that, if the child is encouraged, the child will be successful in meeting this. But if there's too much expected too soon, that could work against the child, and they'll develop more shame and doubt at that point. So that's what's occurring at that time, and that does seem to tie in sort of with Freud's sexual stages as well. Initiative versus guilt, and this is during the preschool years, so somewhere between 3 to 6. So they're learning through play with other children, learning greater and greater tasks. We know that parents and caregivers who encourage effort over outcome, so effort over outcome, and praise initiative will assist children. So again, it's not about whether or not they win something or they're able to throw the ball and make the basket. It's really the fact that they tried. Okay, so again, largely this has to do with what kind of feedback they're getting from the environment as to how they will do. So if we want them to try new things, not be scared to try new things, we want to encourage them to make the effort and praise them even though maybe the outcome isn't what they wanted. Okay, so that would be more on the initiative side versus solely focused on the outcome. So those are some of the stages relative to our target group, right? But as I said, it goes up into older adulthood. Okay, how you guys doing? You need to take a break? Everybody okay? Okay. All right, let's talk about temperament. Have any of you heard this term before? And what do you, well, I have it up here, asking you what it means. Yeah, a lot of research on temperament, and this is how it's defined, because I do notice that sometimes people have difficulty with really getting a handle on what this is. It seems to be an innate, so we're born with it, innate response style, having to do with emotional reactivity, regulation, and expressiveness. So it's really kind of centered around emotional, how we respond to the environment emotionally. And we do see that it's something that tends to be what we're born with, a tendency. So when you have a parent, complaining about their child, and oh my God, they're so fussy, and they seem to overreact, and that kind of thing, they may be really describing this type of style. It's going to be pretty salient, we say. It's going to be something that's pretty much pervasive. Okay? So when we use the word salient features, it's something that in the literature, when it's been studied, that we don't just see it as an infant, but actually it's going to be part of their style in interacting with people and interacting with new situations. And there seems to be a couple of temperament, and also sociability is another area that has been studied. And sociability and temperament seem to be pretty salient. So when you have a child who's very outgoing and social, it's likely that they'll probably be an outgoing social adult. Okay, so it tends to be a salient feature, and this does too. So we want to make sure parents understand this, and I know it can be kind of difficult to understand because we're talking about emotional expression, right? It can be hard to explain. It does affect how the child copes with stressful situations, which we have to do all the time, right? So how the child might cope when you take them over to, a friend's house and the friend's going to watch them for the first time, or you take them to a new setting, or even just to a birthday party. You might have some children that react no problem. Another one who's going to scream and holler and yell and be upset and stressed for a long amount of time, right? So you see the differences. We can really assist parents by discussing differences in temperament with what we know about temperament styles, effective ways to parent that child with a given temperament. And that's really key here, and there's been more and more research to help parents. Because again, it's innate, right? So it's kind of like you got to deal with that. We're not really going to change that. We have to deal with that, so we have to know, what does that look like? Okay? I mean, if they're difficult, what does it look like? Okay, so let's take a look at these. The most famous study that brought this to light, okay, was Thomas and Chess study. This was in the 50s, and they identified 3 temperament styles. Okay, and this is largely still pretty much what we use today. They identify children that are easy. That sounds nice, right? Children that are slow to warm up, and children that are difficult. Okay, and I believe at this point in time they actually changed that word. They're using a more of a friendlier type of word, because obviously if you hear your child has a difficult temperament, that has a negative sound to it. And really it shouldn't be that way, that we view them, we don't want the parent to view them negatively by the words we use. However, this was the data. There was easy, slow to warm up, and difficult children. Basically, they looked across several different traits. Okay, these are to name a few. They watched activity level, they watched distractibility of the child, and regularity. Okay, kind of consistency. So they looked at some of these things because they want an idea, again, of something that would be a pattern with the child. Was it a consistent pattern? Okay, so let's talk about some of these. So the easy child, which again has a nice sound to it, right? For the most part, pretty happy child, right? Expressing contentment. We see regular in sleeping and eating patterns. You take them to different environments, different contexts. You bring different people into their environment. They're relatively adaptable and calm. Okay, so infants that had this and it was recognized with this were easy temperaments. However, could possibly have a downside. Again, what can we help parents with? We won't necessarily have a parent complaining about this, but as the child gets older, right, it may be that the child, their natural pattern is not to maybe, complain about anything. Okay, they don't get overly frustrated, but they may hold things more so inward, right? Okay, that's something to think about. That doesn't mean necessarily that they do, but it's something to think about. So because of their characteristic nature, parents should set aside time for intentional talk about their frustrations or other feelings. There's a great deal that happens in the lives of adults, and it does impact children. And if you have a child that has this type of temperament, they may not readily talk about it or express it outwardly in their behavior, right? So if you have parents that are going through a rough time, maybe one's unemployed, maybe they're going to get divorced, maybe there's issues with another sibling, or there's stuff going on at school, in the preschool, and, so it'll be, this would be one recommendation anyway for parents with these kinds of children. It doesn't mean that everything's hunky-dory all the time just because, they're happy and calm, right? That is how they cope with things, which can be good, but they do need an outlet, right? Okay. So if you need to ask, and ask. I'm just checking in with them. Slow to warm up, okay? Also sometimes referred to as the cautious child. Relatively inactive and fussy. You definitely heard parents use that term, likely, but they seem very fussy. Okay, when they're exposed to new situations, they may react negatively. It's something new or novel, taken somewhere new, or a new person. However, again, it's called slow to warm up. With gradual exposure, okay, then they seem to transition. So it's allowing them the transition time, right? So recommending to parents that they do, stick to a routine. And if they do tell the child, they're going to do something, if they can follow through on that. And just allowing the child time to establish relationships in new situations. So if they're right by you in a new situation, instead of saying, well, go over there, or go, allowing them time to adjust to that situation. And not imposing on them that they immediately interact or play a game with the other children that they don't know, that kind of thing. And you can see how, you may know some parents how this could really be a clash, right? And that's usually where we see the problem, is with the clash between the parents and the child's innate temperament. And so that's why we're trying to ease that by explaining to them about temperament and some of these things that they can do. Instead of, forcing the child to do something that really feels so uncomfortable and it's not natural for them. So difficult, kind of reworded as feisty or active. That sounds better, right? But overall, identified, at least through that initial research, as being fussy, but active, okay? We don't see regular sleeping and eating patterns with this child so much. It's more irregular when compared to the others. They don't like noise, kind of easily upset by noise, so they have that emotional reactivity to that. Intense reactions to new people and situations. Okay, again, just not in their comfort zone. Again, you may know children, on all three of these dimensions, right? You likely would. Parents should prepare a child when taking to unfamiliar surroundings, or even when they're going to change an activity. So they're really all into an activity, they're engaged in it, they're comfortable, and now you're going to change it or move them to another area to do something else. So basically preparing them, if possible, for that. Because again, they tend to not transition very well with these things, and if anything, have very intense negative reactions to it. So again, they are very active children, providing enough space and time for burning off the energy and frustrations they have. It doesn't mean necessarily that they're ADHD. There's parents that immediately, I've heard so many parents, oh, he's hyperactive. That's what we used to label it as, hyperactive. It's ADHD. But no, that's actually a diagnostic label. It's treatable with psychotropics, and there's a lot of kids that have high energy levels. It doesn't mean that they are hyperactive. So these are some of the things here at the bottom that we would, advise a parent if they do happen to seem to have a child who's active and has some of these other traits. And allowing the child some choices, but letting them burn off the energy and their frustrations.